¿Cómo está, familia? I always love getting the after lunch slot because it's like everybody's kind of either still eating or they're kind of like, okay. So I have a great panel, but before we get started, I just want to tell you a little bit about what we're going to be talking about. It's a brand new subject called emerging technology. Now, this is a funny topic for us because, you know, when you think about it, there will always be an emerging technology panel. When HITEC is 100 years old, we're going to be having a panel on emerging technology. If we were having this panel in 1970, we would be talking about emerging technologies. I got the coolest IBM mainframe now, and I can run all my bank systems in that room-sized computer. That is amazing. In the 1980s, we would have been talking about the personal computer and how it was coming and starting to revolutionize what we were doing. Or we would be talking about MTV, depending on what side of the generation you were on. They were both kind of cool. If we were talking about this in the 1990s, we'd be talking about, you know, this internet thing, this World Wide Web. It's pretty cool. I think it's going to go somewhere. I'm going to put all my pictures up there, and I'm going to have a blog. And we were all going to Archie and Veronica at the universities, getting all of our I'm showing my age, I know. Getting all the information we needed from then. The 2000s, you know, we start talking about mobile computing. I remember the first BlackBerry I got and how cool it was. It was actually blue in color, and I got it at a Lotus Notes conference. What? It was emerging technology. I guess the point I'm trying to make is, you know, there's always going to be emerging technologies. So we're kind of curious, and we're going to be talking about what really are we starting to look at here in the 2000 teens, right? 2017, gosh, time is just really flying. So what kind of things are we looking at now? So I want to play a short video to kind of introduce a little bit of what we might be talking about here. So can we cue the video, please, Patricia? I love drones. They're so cool. So anyway, I'm also a geek. As anyone that knows me probably knows that. So to get started with the panel, I want to take a moment and have our panel introduce themselves. I like people to tell their own stories. You don't want to hear me reading a bio. So why don't we start, Julissa, with you?
Sure. So my name is Julissa Ramirez, and I am a technical program manager at Intel in the drones division. I lead the service and repairs worldwide, globally for Intel, among other supply chain programs. I've been at Intel for 5 years, and I'm excited to be here.
Cool.
Hi, my name is Nisha Paliwal, and I'll describe myself as a technologist, change agent, and an innovator. So how many of the audience thinks finance side of the banking is boring?
Hey,
and I make them interesting. I make sure, I make sure it's interesting, and I make sure we bring in the right technology to deliver what we have for the finance function. So I lead finance technology for Capital One, and very proud to be here amongst all of you.
Bob?
So I'm Bob West, and as of last Tuesday, I'm officially a free agent, so we'll figure out where the next adventure is. I've worked in technology and security for a little over 30 years, and security since '95. Cloud and identity are some of the areas that I go deep in, as well as been tinkering with blockchain and IoT. And
I'm sure there's going to be some interest in that.
yeah, it's an interesting world.
It is. So why don't we get started? You saw the video on the drones, and you know when I first was talking to Jalissa about this panel, and she started talking about what she was doing, and I saw the video, I go, okay, that's kind of unique. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you guys are up to, and then how this technology is really starting to embed things?
You know, I think Intel's changing the conversation about what drones are today in the world. We have patent technology on our light show drones. So now we're using drones instead of fireworks, to create different kinds of light shows. Mm-hmm. But we also have the commercial drones, which is where I'm at. And we're using them for different corporations, oil and gas industries, agriculture industries, et cetera. For inspection, we're using them. There was a case study recently where there was a flood, and we used one of our drones to actually locate people, and then it sends the information back to the group on land, to the first responders, telling them where the people are so that they can go and rescue them right away. So there are just so many applications for these drones. So Intel wants to be there, making sure that the technology is used in the correct way, responsibly and safe. And we're partnering up with organizations like Airbus. We're doing inspections of their planes right before they fly out, et cetera. There's a lot of cool things happening in this space.
Oh, that's interesting. So Nisha, why don't you tell us a little bit about how Cap One looks at emerging technologies and how you're utilizing that to really help your customers and so forth?
Yeah, Capital One, of course, from many areas of the bank, are very focused on the customer. You know, what does customer want, especially in the new and arising, millenniums. When you think of, millenniums and the banking, the whole footprint is changing. What I'll share with you is where I fit in. So I manage the back office and the backbone of the company, which is the finance technology. So this is where entire companies of data come in, and we have to churn through the data to do our risk management numbers, our regulations, the CCAR, the DFAST, all the, like I said, the boring side of the bank, right? So where we are bringing the technology here is making sure what we build in our ecosystem, right from some of the mentioned by Bill, I think blockchain has been one of the big prototypes in the space lately. We are utilizing machine learning and the AI for some of the major forecasting and the planning functions. A lot of them in the prototype stage. Why? Because we are at the same time, we have declared all in on the cloud. So we are taking all our applications at the same time to the cloud. And what does that mean from a technology perspective is really a lot of self-serve and hands-off operations and the release management, the change management, and really mobilizing our staff to up their talent game from the upcoming technologies. So that's what I'm up to for the last 2 years, and the journey continues this year and beyond.
Bob, as a free agent, as you said, what are you seeing out there as far as what's coming up, what's emerging technologies means to most of the folks that you service?
Yeah, so see, the Internet of Things is something really interesting, and you can look at like the early applications of Internet of Things would be things like smart meters for utilities. So you can do a lot of interesting things in terms of really understanding how much electricity are customers using, what are the patterns in terms of usage, and then building it out at a macro level. So what's the consumption in a county or a city or a neighborhood, and then start to make some interesting decisions from there. There's a pilot that's going on, pardon me, between DHL and Audi right now. So let's say you're parked at the airport and you're expecting a package, and you want someone to deliver it to your car. what you want to do is control where DHL has access. So you want them to have the ability to open up your trunk, for example, and that's the only place that you want them to have access to. And a couple of things that come into play there are identity. So how can you prove and how can you maintain integrity and identity to make sure that in fact, it is my car, right? And that's my trunk. Or that it is this particular driver or particular vehicle. So there's some pretty interesting applications in the Internet of Things world. In blockchain, and I'm not sure if everyone knows the guts of blockchain, but effectively one of the pieces that's there is you have this ledger, if you will, that a number of people or a number of entities can update, and anything that you update stays there permanently. And there's a lot of interesting applications. You have the core applications like, Bitcoin, for example, is one of the major cryptocurrencies. Ethereum is an open source platform. And one of the things, so Brazil right now, for example, is partnering with Microsoft and a consulting company that uses Ethereum for most of their work to create identity for people that transact business with Brazil. And one of the important things is making sure that everything is properly protected throughout the supply chain. That's a really interesting application. In financial services, for example, let's say you're doing stock trades. One of the lags in stock trading is a settlement of a trade. So what if you could do that in close to real time, right? You use blockchain as the foundation. You make a trade, and then the settlement, if it's done properly, could happen immediately. So money exchanges hands very quickly. So there's a lot of opportunity just to fundamentally transform and make infrastructure more efficient.
How many of us have been to Gartner Symposium, and you hear about these terms like blockchain, you hear about Internet of Things, and I'm just wondering, in the different companies that you guys have worked in, when does something become more than just hype? Because, I'll tell you what, for the last 4 years I've been going to Gartner, and I'm a big Gartner fan, so don't get me wrong. It's just, we keep hearing, hey, Internet of Things, it's coming. So at your companies and the companies you worked at, when does something start becoming real? That's something you can start using for your customers and in your businesses?
Yeah, I can go first. So our, at least the division that I manage for finance, one of the main thing is you cannot risk closing your books. Which bank can take the risk of not closing the books, for example, or missing the CCAR submission? So when you weigh in innovation and technology, what it can offer to you, whether it's emerging or OneNotes or Lotus Notes, what you want to keep in mind is the disruption that it can cause to the business. And then the EQ part of it is the people part. So when you disrupt, the talent and the impact on the people has to be weighed in against the technology that you're about to put. So I'll give you this example of DevOps. We all have heard DevOps. It's an ability for a developer to develop the code and operationalize at the same time and making sure it's fully automated front to back. You've tested it, you can deploy it, there is no change order. So left to right, it's in production every second of the day, every minute of the day, every hour of the day, whatever is the frequency. But when we do something like that and employ all the emerging tech to do DevOps, the impact on the people is hopefully so positive, and that's how people should look at. No longer am I waking up 2 a.m. in the morning to make sure the release happened. No longer do I have to look at a dashboard where the files come in and files went out. So I think for me it has been the proper weighing of these factors and make sure those factors provide a positive overall experience to the business, to the people who are running it, and overall, end-to-end that you're about to set up.
I think with Intel, the drones, I think in general, the drones conversation is it's what's it right now, right? But I think it became real, at least for our team, when we started seeing the demand that was out there. And when your capacity to produce is not as fast as the demand that's coming in, you start to see, well, there's a real opportunity here. We're actually making some kind of impact from a dollars perspective. Now, I think there's another conversation technologies like the drones, we have to be very careful. And I think there was a big debate between Mark Zuckerberg and the CEO of Tesla, Elon Musk, when they were talking about the responsibility as a technologist when you're bringing these kinds of technologies into the world, what we have to think about ethically. What this means, putting a drone out there, anyone can probably grab one and equip it with all kinds of things. So it becomes a bigger conversation when it involves the lives of others. It involves that drone being potentially used for the wrong applications. It involves how we're shaping the way that we do business in the future. So these are all conversations that need to be had at the forefront, and conversations that are happening even in social media and in the news, et cetera. So, yeah.
Bob?
I think if I look at companies just in a broad context, you have early adopters, you have followers, and then you have the late adopters. And I've had the good fortune of working with companies that I've either tricked into thinking that buying early stage technology is good or otherwise. But so, for example, we
Very honest.
when I was at Fifth Third Bank, we were the fourth company in the world to have SAML in production for Federation, and we were actually working with Alberto's company, Thor Technologies, for provisioning, and we were solving a fundamental business problem with Federation. So we outsourced our human resources function, and we didn't have a human resources portal at the time. So we needed to make sure that employees were able to get to the portal seamlessly, and also to make sure that the portal understood that they were who they said they were. And so what was interesting is the human resources group footed the bill for all of our identity infrastructure for the bank, because they got a 6-month ROI on that, given the savings in human resources and technology, et cetera. So I think for me, is number one, you have to be looking to solve a fundamental business problem, and then understanding what's the technology I have, whether it's cutting edge or bleeding edge, to solve that. Go back to IoT.
Right.
And there's some practical things that you can solve, right? So you think of things like Nest as an example. I mean, you can really tune keeping your home or facility at the proper level, and really look at trending, and ultimately lower the consumption of electricity. And then you have some analytics that can be done on the higher end, right, in terms of just really understanding what's happening at a macro level.
Cool. I want to dive into the drones a little bit more. I got one for Father's Day. I was very happy.
So cool.
I flew it, and I crashed it about 17 times. So, that's playing with technology. Oh, God. I hope so. I keep trying to. Anyway, so, there's one thing to have something like this on a personal level. You're playing with it. But commercialization of it. I mean, we're hearing a lot about Amazon and delivery of drones. I have one of my good friends is a Reaper pilot in the military. So, what do you see coming? What is your group getting ready for? What do you see coming? When do you think we're actually going to be seeing the day, when we're going to start seeing, really, drones are just an everyday part of our lives as they deliver and things like that?
I love the Amazon question. I per se myself don't see that as an option in the near future.
Okay.
Only because when I think of all of the certifications that it takes just for us to fly the drones in specific spaces in the United States and in other countries, I imagine the legal barriers that Amazon has to go through before it can fly that drone anywhere. So just from that perspective, Intel's in that forefront and in that seat, making those decisions of what those regulations are going to be in the future, because we're one of the first.
You're helping to shape the regulatory
Exactly.
environment around it, okay?
But the applications that I think we're going to start seeing more often is where companies, for example, if you're AT&T or Verizon and you have millions of towers in the US, imagine instead of sending a person up there, you have a drone that comes and takes that information from those towers and then sends that to the cloud. So I think it's more the drone from the hardware perspective, yes, but it's more of a software conversation, it's more of a cloud conversation. I think the hardware is a way in, But what we're getting to is getting to places where we can collect data, process that data, and store it in ways that companies haven't been able to do before. So I think we'll see the drones there very soon. We're starting to partner with a lot of different organizations here in the US and worldwide. But from the Amazon perspective, I don't know if you'll see drones carrying your packages.
By heart.
Yes.
Well, this goes back to the hype cycle, right?
No,
So of course, Amazon's been saying, yeah, look how cool we are. We're going to deliver it. And frankly, as a badge-wearing geek, I'd love to see
I
that.
hope so. I hope that they do that.
You know, my current role, one of the companies that I'm helping through my company is Accudyne Industries, and they make pumps for the oil and natural gas and aerospace and things like that. We started looking at some drone technology to actually do safety inspections of some of the rigs.
At Northrop Grumman, when I worked there, I worked in the launch tube missile division. And one of the things for us to do, we had to do constrained space training, and they had to lower me into like this huge hole in the ground. It was maybe like 50 feet. And I remember thinking it was just super dark in there, and there were just flashlights. And I remember thinking there has to be like an easier way to do this kind of stuff. Like, well, you have to do constrained space training because submarines are constrained space. And I remember recently we partnered up with another organization that uses our drones in spaces where humans can't physically fit to go and check for cracks and different kind of anomalies. Where I'm like, where was that drone when I was climbing down the 50-foot? So, you know, the possibilities are endless.
Right, right. I mean, that would really help save lives, too. I think some of those places could be pretty dangerous, and having a drone in there would be very cool. I'm going to shift the conversation a little bit to financial services. Nisha and Bob, I want both of your opinions on this. You know, I've been in financial services most of my career, so we've always been saying, okay, checks are going away, checks are going away, checks are going away. Everybody's going to be using, you know, debit cards and stuff, and that took forever, a long time before it's starting to be the point where checks are very small amount of the volume. Where are we headed as far as digitization of monetary items? Where does blockchain fall into that? Where do things like Bitcoin fall in? And what are the financial services industries doing in that aspect? Because I hate to carry cash, but sometimes, you know, you need it. So who wants to tackle that one first?
Want me to go?
Sure. Like, not me.
You know, so I think that when you look at how currency evolves and how people make payments, it's something that takes time, right? I mean, you think of, like Diners Club was the first credit card company back in the 50s.
I haven't thought of them in years.
And think of just from a cultural perspective, you're used to paying cash.
Right.
So now you have to help people understand, here's a different form of payment. And then you have to get the merchants to build the infrastructure and understand, you know, here's a really simple way to get paid. So think of the curve in terms of when credit cards reached the masses. So I think it's going to take some time to get to the point where you have you know, broad adoption of cryptocurrency, for example. I mean, you know, you're not just talking years. I think you're talking 10, 15, 20 years where people will really begin to use it en masse.
Do you think a government entity is going to have to step in to kind of give it that backing, Nisha?
Yeah, so I think from a pure blockchain perspective, it's many, many years out for many, many reasons. Number one, it's a technology which is being compared to the internet. So for those of us who remember how internet got created, there is a big trust factor in blockchain. So when we think about something as transparent, a distributed ledger, which is what it's called, you're pretty much exposing all transactions somewhere that you can't touch and feel, you can't know anything. You think about where we are today from a money aspect. How many of us will be comfortable giving our wallet to each other? Right here in this room. It's a big trust factor. Yeah. Are you going to do that, Frank? Come on, let's do it.
Yeah. Hand it over.
It's kind of
right
empty.
here, just give it to me.
First is the big trust factor, right? And while there are smart contracts and everything being written around the technology to enable that, it's a big question out there. Who's going to trust who? How are they going to trust? What is the data that you're going to collect? And so and so. Second is what you brought up. the government here. So there's big work being done by DC Chamber of Commerce, of course, and we definitely hats off to them. But will government here allow that, and what will be the regulations if and when they allow? Insurance companies doing enough in this space. Financial services, of course, are treading the water, I would say, very slowly, carefully. I did a prototype more on internal reference data management, nothing external, right? Third is outside our boundaries. So think about international now, right? We are talking about this could be a global impact. So when we're talking of even US border to Canada border,
Right.
all these factors, how are the policies going to work out? How are the international rules going to play into this whole game? So is the technology going to be real? Absolutely. This is the path forward of having. The other factor I would say in this is just how ready. So in this room, of course, we're all professionals. We kind of can say we are ready. But how about the layman on the street? Do you think they will be ready for something like that in years to come? There are many, many things. Even, I come from India. If I go back to my own villages, even a computer or a laptop there is, wow, you got it? What are you talking about? So versus where we are, right? So when we talk of masses from a money aspect, I think it's years before something like that will be utilized in a full-blown system.
Yeah, just going back to what you were talking about. So the internet, its guts was built around 1970.
Yeah.
And it was about 95 when people started. I think that was the first year that online banking came into play with Wells and Huntington Bank.
Yeah.
So it took about 25 years or so to actually start getting mass adoption of the internet post World Wide Web from CERN.
We listened to some panels this morning. The government panel was fascinating. I hope you guys got a chance to sit in on that one. And you see the issues that the government agencies face trying to get budgets and things like that. How far ahead do we get with the emerging technology? I know in banking, when we put up our website, the OCC in Chicago went nuts. It's like, so how far ahead do you guys get before, without having to bring them along to get going, especially in regulated environments? So who wants to tackle that one?
Not too much. I mean, you have to bring them along. There's no magic. I mean, we did that with actually not even technology, even a simple agile processes. I mean, we went through quite a bit of buy-in from the regulators that it's okay for us to do DevOps even. Back to my example, right? You have to bring them along. That's why I think while they are catching up, the OCC, Fed, everybody's catching up to the idea of that technology is going to disrupt. But each one of them is still I call it a group hug, right? We have to just get everybody along, make sure they are comfortable, make sure we are comfortable, right? We don't want to risk. I mean, at the end of the day, you're dealing with people's money at the bank, so you don't want to risk any of that, right? That's why I mentioned first is you got to make sure your processes can run the way it's not risky to the bank, it's not risky to the customer, it's not risky to your overall business proposition. And then you bring in technology to enable, and have that balance.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say in the drone space, we have to certify at every single country that we try to sell drone.
Oh, really?
And it's a completely different process for every government. We just got certified in Australia. And the US, we're one of the first to be able to sell commercial drones in the United States. But it's a battle. And we have to be there every single step of the way with our legal team.
So it's really a collaborative effort in both industries. Bob?
So when I was at Cipher Cloud, I had the opportunity to speak with the Bank of England and the Monetary Authority of Singapore in terms of what it means to protect information in the cloud. And one of the principles was having control over the encryption keys if you're encrypting information at Salesforce or ServiceNow or Box, right? And there's a lot of data residency and data sovereignty issues that go along with that. So think of having a similar conversation with IoT or Bitcoin or Ethereum or anything related to blockchain, right? I mean, you have to get them comfortable that this makes sense, that the right controls are in place, that nothing unpredictable is going to happen. And once you get past those conversations, then you can get much more traction as a business. But they can make or break things for, if you're talking about a financial services company.
Okay. So we've also heard a lot about security. cybersecurity in all the aspects I'm listening to, how important is that in your particular worlds at this point?
So if anything, that is the number one.
It was a trick question, yeah. I wanted the banker to say security wasn't important, but it didn't work out.
Yeah, I mean, you got to, I mean, to you talk about the cycles, testing any one of the emerging technologies to the point where you are satisfied with everything does take a long time, right? To have that empirical evidence that there is nothing that can threaten your ecosystem, especially with the new technology. I mean, if you talk of physical like drones, or 2025, we are talking of a thinking cap coming in. Imagine a technology like that, what can it do to security in general? Forget cyber now. You're talking of thinking cap. Frank, if I put it on your head today,
Yep.
that's the impact we are talking about, right? So,
So I think one of the things that people and organizations need to internalize is that you can't have perfect security, right? So you think in the physical world, bank branches get robbed regularly. But the fact that they get robbed regularly, it doesn't mean that you shut down as a business, right? I mean, you start putting the controls in place. So you have video cameras, you have packs of dye and stacks of money. So when someone steals it, you have a pretty good chance of understanding who did it, and you minimize the loss, the risk of the loss, or the amount of money that you lose. And protecting information in the digital world is the same way. You have to have visibility into what's happening on the endpoints, on servers, on the network, in the cloud. And once you understand that, then you can put the right controls in place to happen. So, I mean, there's going to be issues with Internet of Things or cryptocurrency or blockchain. But what you want to do is create a really solid architecture that's baked into the infrastructure. So when you do have problems, you minimize the damage. So, as an example, back in 2013, Target had their breach.
Right.
And they lost about 100 million credit and debit cards.
I was one of them. Anybody else?
So yeah, and I knew 3 people personally whose checking accounts were drained. They got their money back, but it was a pain in the posterior. And then there's all the legal ramifications that.
Did you hear how he did that? That was very nice.
Posterior.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So think of if actually they'd had people monitoring the burglar alarms, right? I mean, because they had intrusion detection systems in place, they had all this infrastructure, but no one was paying attention to it. So rather than having 100 million credit cards lost, what if it was 1 million or 5 million? Right? I mean, that becomes a really significant difference. And that's the key thing when you start talking about emerging technologies, is you have to bake that in and really understand when something unusual is happening and then have the process to respond to it.
a little more probably, just to add to complete that, is a little more proactive versus reactionary.
Yeah, for
yes,
sure.
we can put the cameras after the fact, but how about predicting that the theft is about to happen?
Yeah.
I think that's
Yeah.
where we are headed from a technology.
Analytics.
I think for drones it's a little bit different because we know, people always say, well, what if somebody puts a bomb on it and then they fly it? Well, you can put a bomb on a car, you can put a bomb on anything really. How do you prepare for that threat?
Right.
How do you prepare your drone so that it's not used negatively, right? Or in a bad way. So that's the conversations that we're having now. For example, a big question that we have now is how do we arm ourselves or disarm the drone when it's going over areas that it's not supposed to be flown over.
Like airports and stuff like that.
So now we have software that can disable your drone when it's flying over areas that it's not supposed to. But that's a technology that we could use. Once we know more about the user, if we know that the drone is being used in a way that's negative, we can shut it down from base. So that's a conversation that we're having on technologies that we're trying to put into our drone systems.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because there's been some articles in the news, of course, where drones come close to hitting an airplane or something like that, and,
Yeah.
and there's those safety concerns. The idiots that are flying them are always going to make it bad for the rest of us. My last two questions are a little bit of a curveball. So what is not being talked about today on the hype scale that you would consider something that everybody's going to think of as second nature in a couple of years? But what are you not seeing what are you not hearing about in emerging technology that's not being hyped?
I would say thinking cap is something I don't think many people have heard. I don't know if it is in the hype curve or not, but that's a technology which is coming fast and furious. So if I am able to predict what the human is thinking to make that human decision, so now I have made machine learning a lot more palatable from an end-to-end perspective. So today we are collecting the data, we can do the machine learning on it, but there's a human aspect, human decisioning for which I must stop, make the human decision. But if that thinking cap can allow us to make the human decisioning as well automated, then the needs of humans,
Okay, you're
they go
scaring
away.
me.
Yeah, you should be scared.
I don't know, man. These are all.
That's interesting.
But same on that end, we talk about autonomous vehicles.
Yeah.
And that's gonna come back very fast and very furious. And the conversation, again, to bring it back to ethics, is if you are in a car, right, and you're drunk, let's say. Not that you would be, but let's say you are. And there's a bus full of children coming your way. Well, the car that you're driving, if it's autonomous, is gonna make a decision in that moment whose life is more valuable. If it could scan that bus and knows that there's children and the children are the future, or if it scans your car and your children are in there, what if the technology, the AI, starts making the decision at a second? Your life doesn't matter compared to the future, right?
Whoa.
Or what if the AI that we create attaches to you, right? We've seen a lot of movies. What if the AI knows you the best, knows who you are, knows your potential possibly, and decides that you as a leader in your organizations, maybe a CIO, CEO, has more impact than the 50 children that are coming? It's a good
I'm gonna
question.
sleep tonight.
Yeah.
Don't sleep, you shouldn't. But these are the conversations that we need to have right now, and it has to be done furiously. Yeah.
Can I add to your insomnia?
Oh, great.
So I wrote this article in 2009, and one of the scenarios was, well, what happens if someone gets control over healthcare devices and either changes your medical records?
Yeah. Oh.
So let's say you're allergic to penicillin, or now I have all my IoT devices that are connected to the internet. So what happens if I can in real time give you more of a particular medicine or not enough?
Yeah.
Right, there's those types of things. So I think
I'll tell you what. When we were at J&J, when I was at J&J,
I just wouldn't go to the hospital, quite frankly, if I were to have a problem.
All right, thanks, guys. It's been good. No. When I was at J&J, we have a lot of medical devices that we implant. So that is one of the concerns that we had at Johnson. They still do. Just because I retired, they still have the concern. What if someone takes over a pacemaker? Mm-hmm. What if someone takes over? So it's important. That's why I brought up the question of security.
Yeah.
It's just super, super critical that as we're moving into the future, we don't rush at such a way that we put more lives at danger, and yet we still have that discovery that we need to have.
Yeah. Going back to the autonomous cars and cars
this
in
is a great
general.
conversation.
That's gonna be so cool.
Yeah. So I think it was 7 or 8 years ago. Someone broke into the Prius infrastructure. So all cars are basically computers. They have a number of computers in them, right?
Exactly.
And they were able to shut a Prius down as it was driving down the road. So part of it goes back to, have I actually put in the right security ingredients into the infrastructure, right? So think of, the layman's analogy would be when a car rolls off the assembly line, you don't add quality then, right? It's a function of the manufacturing process. So now I have all this infrastructure. I have, even going like into the OnStar systems, right? Where you have all this infrastructure that I have. Well, what happens if I take it over, right? Or I make a change, or the brakes don't work for whatever reason. So don't press on the brake when
But
you
look what
Tell your
happened
kids
with
to go into security, please.
Yeah.
Look what happened with the Facebook robots. Was it
Oh
Facebook?
yeah, that's right.
So they created, was it Facebook? Yeah, I think it was.
Yeah, it was
They
Facebook.
created two robots, and then at some point they lost control of them,
Yeah, they just went on their own.
did their own thing.
Where's
Well,
Tim?
that's
Is
what
Tim
happens
cooking?
when you create that technology. Now, as a technologist, you have a duty to test until you can't test. You have a duty to break that system in as many ways as you can. And you have a duty to make sure that before it goes out to the real world, that you are aware of all the threats that are coming its way. So
Yeah, I mean, you have to do what's commercially reasonable, right? I mean, you can't be perfect, but you have to do what's commercially
Right.
reasonable.
But you need to develop an ability to constantly upgrade it, because if you've
Yeah.
written a software, somebody else has already written a software to hack it. So
Yeah.
that whole development cycle has to become very, very less, and we have to be able
Yeah.
to test
Yeah.
and deploy much
Yeah.
faster than before.
Yeah, I think the other thing that concerns me is, so technology is just changing so rapidly. It's to the point where I think it's getting ahead of our capability to manage it.
yeah.
And so, much less protect it, right? And yeah, so I'll go home and take my Prozac and I'll be fine.
Yeah, you're good. You're good.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure I leave a couple of minutes for questions, but one last, I'm a sci-fi fan. So you guys have all been invited back to HITEC 20 in 10 years. What's this panel talking about?
I'm not coming, I'm sending my out there.
Yeah, my hologram will be there.
I'll be very old. Go ahead.
I hope that we were talking about new transportations and the impacts that that's having. I don't know. So much out there.
I'm hoping we're talking about a much more connected, much more. I love the whole concept of bringing cultures together, bringing people together. So I'm hoping we're talking about a much more connected, understanding world.
Yeah.
I hope so.
All right, with that, we've got a couple of minutes for questions. If anyone wants to ask the panel any questions on what they're seeing out there. Fell asleep after lunch.
Okay, we only have 1 minute.
Post-lunch coma.
We have one in the back. Gracias.
Of course, we're all nerds enjoying the
We
content.
love to talk about drones, but can you talk about like anti-drone and what Intel's doing to sort of defend against those things, like AUDS and nets and
Can you
all
repeat the
those
question? I'm
things?
sorry, I didn't hear you.
The mic's
So-
not on.
But like any defense mechanisms for drones, like nets and AUDS, and what you guys are doing to defend against those?
See, I don't know if I can comment on that.
Okay.
We're sorry, we'd have to kill you afterwards, so we can't disclose that.
I just don't know how much.
She's
I can
got the
comment on
info, though. Did you see that?
it. I was, but now I was like, wait,
Anyone
maybe
else?
not.
Alberto, oh no.
No, it's not about drones. Well, actually, a lot of people are talking about AI, machine learning, et cetera, but studying behavior, right?
Right.
And I think that's kind of a near-term frontier. It's not long-term frontier. So a lot of scenarios, we work a lot with DARPA, we work a lot with InQtel, with all the agencies, some of the financial institutions, but when people tell me, how can you apply that? Everybody's trying to solve that two-factor authentication. How do I know it's you? Identity, big issue for all three of you, not only on drones and people, but especially in people. What have you seen as innovation of the use of behavioral analysis? Let's not talk analytics. And you can use analytics as a technique to be able to, in order to prevent fraud, in order to prevent, making sure that the right people are accessing the right information, not only on cars and everything else, but that's an area that we've been seeing a lot of work, and it's not easy because there's a lot of people say, oh yeah, I do statistical modeling, I just compare one or the other and that's it, but there's a lot of heuristics, there's a lot of modeling that needs to exist, and you establish a baseline. There's training systems to be able to do that. But I think for me, that's one of the next frontiers that is going to face us, because a lot of it is trying to understand who is in the other end of the device. It doesn't have to be the computer. So, any comments on that area?
I'll say for me, it's the data, because the models are going to be only as good. It's going to be your ability to collect the data, quickly analyze that data, which is, again, back to, if you think about data will be endless, and your capacity to store data will be endless. So how do you start predicting based on that data that's about to happen in your model? The other thing I think that's coming up to me, it's very intriguing, is back again, reading the human mind. So at some point, the models are only so good. The decision point of recommendation or what's What should you do is left onto the humans. So figuring out an algorithm based on, many of the neuroscientists are working on it, how does the human behavior, and is that predictable? So what Frank is thinking right now versus what I'm thinking and you're thinking, is that going to be same at some point if we three are in the decision making? So I think some of that scientifically is going to be
Excuse me.
a very important journey going forward.
And going to tools, I know a lot of organizations are using the facial recognition tools in order to determine identity. Well, you know, we have to start talking about that it's not only important who makes these or what code is made for these tools, but also who writes the code. So one thing that was found, I think it was Harvard that made a study, that a lot of the code for these tools didn't recognize faces like mine. Like this color of my skin or facial features that I have wasn't in the data sample set that was used to teach the tool how to recognize faces. So when I go and I use that Facebook tool, it says that I look like a white female, or it says that I'm South, I don't know, from somewhere, not from Dominican Republic. You know, we have to start thinking about who codes. We have to diversify our workforce. We have to diversify our sample sets. We have to diversify
That's a
our
great point.
data,
Yeah.
et cetera.
That is a great point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you know, authentication becomes one aspect of understanding who's doing what, but then you also have, you know, what's their behavior, right? And so, for example, most large financial institutions have insider threat projects or programs that are going on, and a lot of it centers around technology that allows you to understand who is doing what and what are the patterns over time. And you think of, like in the intelligence communities, for example, so let's say you have the CIA.
Or the NSA.
Or, well, yeah, right. But let's say you have some people in operations in either one of the intelligence communities. So what happens what would be interesting is if I understand, so what communication is going on between someone in the field, right, and let's say an adversary, or someone that I know that's actually collaborating with me. It could be one of the I-5, you know, the U.S., Canada, UK, Australia. But I may have an indication that they may have turned, right? So if I can understand behavior from that context, I can prevent a lot of national security issues if I understand what their behavior is. And so having the technology to capture that and the analytics engine behind it to aggregate it and really understand what are long-term patterns, what are transactional patterns, that for me would be really interesting.
So we ran over, but I blame the chairman. It is not our fault. So I want to thank my panel. Amazing job. Thank you very much. And thank you all of you for listening and staying awake after lunch. Appreciate it.